All right, guys, I'm here with Nate Kahn, who is a commander in the NOAA Corps, and he is a pilot?
I'm a pilot. I'm the aircraft commander.
Aircraft commander for this beautiful WP3D, which you're going to have to Google. All right, Nate, first of all, thanks for doing this.
Sure.
All right, so tell us a little bit about the NOAA Corps and the airplane and why it is that you guys are on.
So I'm going to let this guy take off real quick.
By the way, we are on the grounds of Charlotte Douglas International Airport, so...
Okay.
There we go.
So the NOAA Corps is one of the 7 uniformed services of the United States. It's the smallest of the uniformed services. So most people tend to think that we are officers that are on loan from the Navy or from other services to come do this mission. That's actually not true. When I left the Navy, I departed the Navy, and I am now active duty with the NOAA Corps. It's about 300 officers, and they operate NOAA's fleet of ships and aircraft.
Okay.
So my story is I started at the Naval Academy, graduated 2003, went to flight school, chose P3s. I flew P3s with the Navy for 12 years, and then this opportunity came up, and I elected to transfer to the NOAA Corps and continue my service career and continue flying P3s, but now people don't shoot at me.
Yeah.
I fly into hurricanes, but nobody shoots at me, so that's good.
So that's very unique, as we're always talking about different flying jobs. I feel like every month we discover a new job in aviation, and this is pretty cool.
So my path is not necessarily unique for us, but there's a different path within the NOAA Corps, and we actually take college graduates as ensigns they commission and come right into the NOAA Corps as the start of their career. So when that happens, if they come to aviation with us, we send them through a flight school via FSI. FSI is our preferred vendor. So we send them to flight safety down in Vero Beach, Florida. They learn their basic commercial license. I think it's a commercial instrument multi-engine is what they come to us with. And that if they have background, great, it's less time. If they don't, they'll go 0 to hero on that syllabus. And then they come fly our aircraft. And naturally, we don't send somebody who has 250 hours total into this airplane into a storm. They start off flying our fleet of Twin Otters. We have 4 Twin Otters that NOAA's other agencies use for similar style of mission. It's an airborne data collection platform. They use them for marine mammal surveys. They use them for some air chemistry missions, coastal mapping, stuff like that, where they fly a little slower and they get to spend a lot of time building multi-engine turbine time, and then they can fleet up into some of our other aircraft. We also fly a King Air. We have a high-altitude jet that does other surveillance work. So it's not something that you have to go be a 15-year veteran to get a job over here. Like, we take guys right out of school. We train them all the way up. So there is an opportunity for folks that are looking for employment with the NOAA Corps to come that route.
That's amazing. I've been doing this for a long time, and I've never...
Yeah, we're real small. Like it's easy to miss us if you're not paying attention. Yeah. But once you see us and know what you're looking at, you'll find as you turn around at every airport, you'll see our colors and go, oh, I thought that King Air was flying for Wheels Up because we're very similar paint schemes. But in truth, it's one of our aircraft that is out doing work.
Well, so you started talking a little bit about the different missions. So specifically about the P3 and its mission. Okay.
So the mission that our P3 is most well known for is hurricane hunting. This aircraft, we take it right into the heart of the storm. When you hear about guys flying into eye walls to get data and do crazy stuff like that, that's what we're doing. Yeah. So we do that. Basically, it's kind of a twofold mission. We fly into hurricanes so that we can gather data on that specific storm to input to the forecasting models for that storm, so that we can make the forecast better and more accurate based on real-time data. Now, we also carry sensors and conduct experiments for the hurricane research. So those experiments are designed to improve the models as a whole. So when we go out, that data is used. For example, if you look at the data for the forecast of tracks over the last 10 years, there's a significant improvement in the 3 to 5 day forecasting windows. It used to be that we were pretty good out to about 3 days, which isn't really enough time to evacuate Miami. 5 days is enough time to evacuate Miami effectively, right? So we're working on getting out to 7 days being a very accurate forecast. So that's a long-term goal for the hurricane research guys. But we're not really good at intensity forecasting. We're kind of all over the board as far as that goes as an agency. So we're trying to get better. And we carry a lot of equipment that is designed to help improve that. And we've started to see some improvements based on the tail Doppler radar that we carry.
Okay.
So our job is twofold to kind of sum up. One is to improve current forecasts based on the active models, and also to improve those models for future years and storms.
And is that pretty near real-time data? Are you guys beaming data back to a center?
Yeah, so some of the data comes up. We have satellite broadband on the airplane. Some of our data comes off real time to the forecasters. Some of our data is downloaded post-flight and inputted. Our mission times are based on getting our data into a model run right before it happens. So the models aren't continuously updated. Basically, the guys at the forecast center input data, they look at stuff, and then they push a button. I think it's a button, I'm not really sure. But they say go, and then the model runs and generates a new solution. And what we do is we time our missions so that the data we collect is inputted into the system before that next model run happens. That's the idea.
So
we're not a real-time forecasting platform. That's not what we do.
Okay. And that's a great segue. So your mission, what does your mission planning look like? Is there, so is the aircraft commander sort of in charge? Who do you work with to figure out where you're going to fly?
So typically we get sent, the one I look at is a graphical depiction, and it's usually based on a map. And the Hurricane Research Center, the Research Division or the National Hurricane Center will send that to us ahead of time. And then we'll take that map of what basically it's usually a rough picture of where the storm is, what the geography looks like around it, islands and things like that. And they'll say, we want you to fly this pattern in and around the storm, depending on what the mission goals are for the science for that day. And we'll look at it and go, okay, we can do that most of the time because they know we've been working together for so many years that they know what we can do. So they'll send us that, and then we'll sit down and debrief and talk about it, and we'll get an updated center position because all of our work is based on the actual center of the storm. So we'll get an updated center position from the aircraft that was on station before, or we'll swag it if we're the first ones going in. We'll look at it on the map, on the satellite picture, and say, yeah, that's what we're going to do. And then we pick a track in alignment with what the researchers want for quadrants of the storm, and we'll go inbound on that track. And sometimes we're spot on, and sometimes we're not. But as long as we get into the eye of the storm, then we will find the new center point, which is based on a zero wind component. So when you go into the storm, the eye wall is where the heaviest winds are. But even inside, there are still small strength winds swirling around inside. We fly to the exact zero wind point. And it amazes me how the meteorologist can tell me what heading to fly or track to fly to get to the zero wind point. And I'm looking at the wind gauge that we have up in the front, and it hits zero almost every time.
That's amazing.
I would think that 2-3 knots is pretty impressive as far as that goes. Our guys hit zero almost every pass.
From a piloting standpoint, what is that like flying through the eye of a hurricane into or through the wall into the eye?
Flying into the eye walls are bad. Bottom line for aviators, literally everything we do on this mission is completely counter to what every pilot is ever trained to do. Like, we fly away. Like, pilots are supposed to fly away from this mess, and we fly into it. But what we don't do that arbitrarily or randomly either. So, like all this mess we've got going on around Charlotte today, I would not want to get up in the air and just fly into storms for grins, right? So we're very deliberate about where we pick to go in, and we do that on purpose, and there's a lot of background we don't have to get into about that. But as far as what it's like to fly, if you think about it, your fundamentals of IFR is you maintain altitude, airspeed, and heading, right? All the time. Well,
how do you do that in a hurricane?
The answer is you don't. So there are really two priorities that we do our very best to maintain because they are the ones that are most important to us. And the first is attitude. We keep the wings level or as level as possible, and we limit ourselves to, if we have to turn to change a track or adjust where the aircraft is going, we limit ourselves to 5 degrees angle of bank or less when we're in severe weather. So if you think about it, if you've ever tried to turn for 90 degrees at 5 degrees angle of bank, that's a long time. So it's really important for us to make sure that our track alignment is good when we start.
I can't even imagine that. And on top of that, you're going to have 130, 140 mile per hour winds pushing you one way or another. Right?
So typically, and that's why we fly a track, not a heading. So we're flying a track, and you're looking at anywhere from a 30 to 45 degree crab angle is pretty common.
That's amazing.
So we maintain track. That's very attitude and track are the two things that we do our very best to stick when we're coming in. But we don't chase altitude. Like, we normally do a penetration at 10,000 or 8,000 feet, sometimes 7,000 radar, depending on what we're doing.
So not very high.
Normally it's baro. Like, normally we stay with a pressure altitude because we can set it, and the other aircraft that might be in the storm can set that. And regardless of what the storm does, then we know we've still got separation.
Okay.
But sometimes our science requires radar altitudes. That's neither here nor there. We still don't stick an altitude. If the storm pushes us down, we let it push us down. If it pushes us up, we let it push us up. And we'll make gradual corrections when we're in control fully of the airplane to make those adjustments. Because seriously, in moments when the storm decides it's going to toss us, I've been in situations where we caught an updraft and I was pushing down because the airplane is getting slow as the wind is shifting. And we've got max power set, we're still getting slow, so I'm pushing the nose down to try to regain airspeed. Airspeed's another one that we try to chase a lot. But I'm trying to regain airspeed, and I've got the yoke pushed down, and I can feel that the elevator isn't catching. Like there's no air catching in it yet. So the tendency is to want to continue pushing until it catches, and that's a bad place to be. So you kind of set something there, and you let the airplane fight, and eventually it catches and starts to move, and then you've got to recover from that and kind of balance the plane.
Wow.
So we don't chase altitudes. Once we're good and flying on our own again, we'll make a little correction and coordinate the power reduction and all that stuff, but we don't chase altitude. We set 210 knots as our target airspeed for penetrations. That gives us a significant buffer between stall on this aircraft, which in our normal flight configuration is probably down in the 150, 140 ballpark. And then overstress, which is if we get up over 300 knots and then we get a G load, we could really break the plane. So 210 is our target, and we start making adjustments in either the power setting or the controls if we exceed 220 or we go below 200. So those are call outs for the guys in the flight station for how we're flying the plane kind of as a crew. CRM is one of our biggest things for the people actively flying the airplane.
So you guys still have an engineer, and your engineer is controlling power generally.
Yeah,
right?
we hand over power control to the engineer when we're in a storm, because basically the guy in the left seat is wrestling an alligator, like with the airplane. The guy in the right seat is doing all of the talking as far as coordinating that stuff, and he's cross-checking. Effectively, when you're that guy flying, your instrument scan becomes about this big, and it goes between 3 places, just back and forth, and that's your entire world. It's like when you start flying IFR for the first time, and you're like, you can't. Your scan is so tiny that it's just like boom, 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 and that's it. Well, we go back to that. So the guy flying the plane is two-handed on the yoke, and he's wrestling with that alligator. The guy in the right seat is doing everything else that you have to do in flight. Thankfully, we don't have a lot of radio calls to make while we're in the middle of a hurricane.
Generally, nobody else flying in there.
There ain't a whole lot of folks out there that want to talk to us. And then the engineer is actually watching a speed tape in front of him and looking at trends in the speed based on the airflow. And what he'll do is, as he sees speed start to taper up, he'll pull the power back and try to keep us there himself. So, as you can imagine, if you're flying an airplane and you're trying to maintain an altitude and an airspeed and an attitude by yourself, and somebody keeps messing with your power levers, it gets kind of weird. So in our case, we're typically focused on maintaining an attitude, and we let him adjust the power for the speed until he either reaches our max power setting or the flight idle, at which point he'll say that, and we'll adjust the attitude to try to adjust the speed.
So you brought up crew resource management, and as we were walking through, it seemed like a pretty big crew. So or at least a lot of stations back there. So what is the crew complement of this?
So the flight station is 2 pilots and a flight engineer, and when we go out on a mission, we carry 3 pilots and 2 flight engineers, and we do it's up to a 9-hour mission. So we rotate for crew safety and fatigue reasons. Behind them, there's an in-flight meteorologist who is like my right hand. And then there is a navigator who is like my the flight meteorologist is his right hand. So if the flight meteorologist is working only in the weather system, the navigator is keeping an eye on where that weather system is in the real world. Because while we would love to be going to Cuba more frequently, they still don't like it if we show up unannounced.
Yeah, absolutely. A P3.
Yeah, exactly. In a P3 that looks a lot like an EP3.
Right.
So anyway, so behind them we've got probably 5 or 6 different stations where radar operators or scientific researchers can sit, and the complement of that is anywhere from 3 to 7 depending on what we're doing. Get a little further back, there's our data system operator. He runs basically all the networking. Like this is one giant networked laboratory that flies, so he's got quite a challenging job to manage all of that stuff. And then come a little further back, there are 2 more science stations and then a station for an observer to sit back in the windows. So normally our crew complement is about 13, but we typically carry up to 17 or 20, depending on how many seats we have installed and the interest from like media and congressional reps and folks like that.
You'll take them up in a storm?
We will, yeah.
Oh, wow.
We take media all the time because I mean, we're a government agency. We're very small.
Yeah.
Part of what we do is awareness,
Yeah.
So if you want to come see this, if like people can see us talking about this on the airplane, then it gets our message out. It kind of makes people aware of what we're doing. And with the congressional reps, well, they cut our checks.
Their money, right?
So they give us the money to do these things. And if they want to know what that money goes toward, we're more than happy to show them, because we need to upkeep the aircraft. We need new replacement aircraft. We need all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, and these P3s are probably getting a little long in the tooth now.
This particular girl was born in 75. She is 44.
Pretty young, actually, yeah.
And, I mean, for an airplane. Yeah. And we just put new wings on her 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So we're expecting her to stay in service until, give or take, 2030, 2035, somewhere in that ballpark.
Is there a different maintenance program? I mean, you're putting the aircraft through some pretty stressful situations. Is there sort of an upgraded maintenance or a more...
Not really. Our maintenance cycles are based on exactly what NAVAIR put out for the Navy's P3s. We took their pubs and said, okay, this is a good program. We'll use this, because we got the same stuff from Lockheed when we got these airplanes. We do inspect a little more frequently as far as some parts and components and for robustness. But interestingly enough, our flying is less stressful than the way the Navy normally flies their airplanes.
Really?
Because the stress in a storm is all in flight, and we keep our G loads fairly limited, like over 3.5, and we abort for an inspection. Yeah. So it's not like we're going out pulling 5 or 6 G on the airplane and pushing a lot of negative and torquing it around very much. But the counter to that is that we don't do a lot of cycles. Like this plane doesn't do 200 touch and goes a year.
Right.
It maybe does 75 or 80.
Yeah.
And what's really stressful on airplanes actually is the transition from ground to air and vice versa, the cycles. So this airplane has a lot of hours, and it's been through a lot of crazy hours, but it actually has a very low cycle number, which the research indicates cycles are what actually damage the airplanes. Like those Southwest planes, the 737s that were coming apart in flight, and they were like, this airplane's young, we don't know why it's doing it. Well, Southwest, those airplanes make 3 to 5 hops a day with at full weights and transits and stuff. So there's a reason that they're breaking down. It's usually a cycle count and not not like a life fatigue for what we're doing with the plane.
That's amazing. I wouldn't have thought that, but it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? So let me ask you this: what's your most memorable flight that you've had?
So I have 2 or 3. I'll give you. The first one was my first storm, and it was Hurricane Danny in 2015. And we were flying out of Barbados, and we got in the storm, and it was, at that point in time, it was a Category 1 hurricane. I look back on it, and I think, that wasn't really that big. That storm wasn't that big of a deal, but it was my first one, so I was freaking out, man. And we went into it, and we were at 12,000 feet when we went in, which is a little higher than normal, but we did it because we weren't sure what was going on, and we were like, okay, we'll check it out. Freezing level was up at 15 or 16,000 feet, which is kind of key we want to be below that to avoid icing and lightning and grapple, stuff like that. So we went in at 12, and we hit grapple. And I was like, oh, that's weird and loud and awful, and I don't know what's happening, but I'm flying the but my buddy Scott over here, who was the aircraft commander, but he says I'm doing fine, and we have noise-canceling headsets and Vox. So as the co-pilot, you're usually kind of whispering sweet nothings into the other pilot's ears to tell him that it's okay and that he's doing fine, right? Especially when you've got a new guy. So he's talking to me, keeping me calm and steady, and we go in, and we break out into the eye wall, and he was like, what? And he calls our meteorologist and says, hey, Jack, was that grapple? And Jack was like, oh, yeah, that was grapple, which is really bad for the airplane. Yeah. It's like really wet hail. He's like, okay, what do you want to do? He's like, we need to go down 2,000 feet. And he turns to me and says, Nate, take us down to 10. Well, okay. So I descend to 10,000 feet in the eye of a hurricane. Meanwhile, Jack is also calling heading changes, or track changes, so that we can hunt the center. Yeah. So I've got the power at idle. I'm dropping it like it's hot, and I'm cranking around between 30-degree angle bank turns. Those turns can be like 45 degrees either side for track changes as he's trying to set it steady out where the wind is. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of challenging. Okay, whatever, no big deal. And we get down to 10,000, everything's fine. We go back out. I did 2 more penetrations of the storm, no big deal. What was memorable is I came back in later, and Scott and I were having a beer after the flight, and he's like, I've never had to do a descent in the eye like that. That was kind of crazy. And I was like, dude, that was my first trip through the storm. I don't know what you're talking about.
You got a gold star. You had like a camp, right?
This is my first one. I don't know what I'm doing. So that one was memorable. the second was a pass through Matthew in 2016. And we came through the storm, and the radar was a mess. Like this huge, nasty red, like if this is my radar scope, a quarter of it was this red, nasty blob, and this was all eye wall. And our track was just a little off. Like we mistimed it a bit, and we got a little too close to that mess. And as we came into the eye wall, we got hammered. We were down 2,000 feet. We were up 1,500 feet. At one point in time, we were in an updraft, and like I was talking about speed bleeding off, that was a situation where I was laying on the elevator in the plane and wouldn't catch. And that happened multiple times in that 2 to 3 minutes of the eye wall penetration. And it was gross. The G spike was only about 2.9, so it wasn't an abort thing, but we came into that eye. And normally when we're, like I talked about CRM, normally we are chatty, like everybody's talking all the time. We broke out, and once you break out into the eye, it's like the lights come on a little bit, like as it gets bright again. And everybody knows you're through because the plane steadies out and it gets bright. So that moment happened, and it was dead silent on our ICS for about 10 seconds. And the pilots that are up front on Vox, like we could hear each other breathing, but that was it. And then about 10 seconds in, my buddy Chris was with me at that point. And he said, "You guys okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, all right, let's go." And it was just one of those moments where like, okay, we're all still alive, we're all still good, let's get back to work. And we hunted center, and ironically, the other side of the eye wall was open, so we got a little bumpy with some wind shear. Because even when a storm's eye wall is not closed with clouds, there is still a wind field there. Okay. So you can go through clear air, but it's still very windy. Yeah. So we cruised out and took care of that one. That was the worst penetration of our season that year. And by the way, you can find a video of that on Facebook. If you go to the NOAA Hurricane Hunters Facebook page, I'm pretty sure it's labeled as like Matthew 2016 or something like that. And at the very start of the video, you can see somebody in the left seat, like a green flight glove, flying the plane. That's my hand.
That's your hand. That's your hand model.
Yeah, that's my hand. In a glove. No big deal. And then the third one that I'll tell you, because I don't know what your timeline looks like.
We're good.
Yeah. The third one is last year in Michael. I was not flying. I was the co-pilot to another senior aircraft commander, and I had done my rotation, my couple of penetrations. I was done. I hopped out. I was in the back taking a nap because we have a rack in the back of the airplane here for rest purposes, and it's got a seatbelt on it, so you're not going to get thrown around too much. And they were going in for the last pass of the storm, and literally we took a really heavy negative G, or it wasn't negative, but it was probably like a 0.25, enough to get you a little floaty. Yeah. So we're coming down, we're a little floaty, and I'm in the rack, and I was asleep, so I didn't brace myself at all when this started to happen. And I came floating up a little bit toward my head, and my knees floated up a bit, and then when the G loaded back up on the airplane and it came back down, it folded me over my seatbelt, and I cracked my head on the ceiling.
Oh, no.
I actually had to look at the other flight engineer was sleeping down in the other rack, and I looked at him. I was like, "Hey, man, am I bleeding?" And he's like, "No." I was like, "Okay, pretty sure I don't have a concussion, but I'll get checked out when I get home." So those are my top three moments. In terms of what the worst storms I've flown into, Lane out in the Central Pacific last year, that was the storm to beat all storms as far as I'm concerned. Because if we had a Cat 7, it would have been a Cat 7. Like we stopped counting at 5, but storms get bigger than that.
Yeah, that's amazing. Amazing! What an amazing mission. I've never been. I knew the Hurricane Hunters. This is very cool. So you kind of mentioned the Facebook page. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I can imagine if people can go to NOAA, find some information. Or
so there's Google. If you Google NOAA, for example, if you were looking for the Commissioned Officer Corps, if you Google NOAA Commissioned Officer Corps, it will get you to a web page for that. If you go to just NOAA's homepage, there's a link system that will eventually filter you down there. The official website doesn't have as much of our media stuff because everybody on the airplane is taking videos with their iPhone. Seriously, Apple could probably do a Hurricane Hunter shot on iPhone commercial because 90% of our stuff is shot from folks' phones sitting in Windows. But yeah, most of that just gets through our PAO. Okay. Our public affairs guy goes right to Facebook, maybe to Twitter. I don't know. I'm not a Twitter guy. I don't get it. But Facebook,
so it's on social media somewhere, right?
Yeah, it's definitely on social media somewhere. And I know our Facebook page has all of those videos available. So if you go to the NOAA Hurricane Hunters Facebook page, you can find all of that stuff.
Okay. And we always end with one question. As a pilot, if money was no object, if you could fly any airplane in the world, past or present, what would it be?
Can I have a counter question?
Sure.
Are we talking about like one flight just for grins, or do I get to fly this thing a lot?
One flight.
I am a child of the 80s, the F-14D.
Nice. That's going to go over well with the listeners.
Top Gun got me into the Navy. Top Gun kept me in the Navy, even though I flew P-3s.
That's awesome.
And I have been known to quote that movie at least once a day. I know it's not real. I get it, but I love it anyway.
I would expect no less from you guys. Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Yep.
Great. Thanks.